Hey everyone, my name is François, and today I'm going to be talking about ViteShot, an open source tool I created that helps you generate screenshots from your components in just a few seconds. First, a bit of background about me. As you can probably tell from my name, I'm French, but I'm also Australian. I've been living in Australia for about 10 years now. I'm quite passionate about developer tooling, and that's why I call myself a developer happiness engineer. I think at the end of the day, developer tooling is what makes or breaks an engineer. And happier engineers create better outcomes for users at the end of the day. As part of that, I recently created a tool called React Preview that I'm going to be talking about a bit more later. Now, consider this app. It's called Hungry. Think of it like Deliveroo or Uber Eats. There are two engineers working on it, Alice and Bob. They're following best industry practices. So they have tests, they do code reviews, all the right things. Bob likes to make sure that the code is as clean as it can be. And he sees that there's a class name here that doesn't seem to be needed in the menu picker. So he removes it. Of course, he reruns the jest snapshots. So you can see on the right here clearly what changed in the HTML. And then he sends that to Alice. Alice receives that and she clearly understands what's changed, but it's not clear visually what was the outcome of that change. And really the only way for her to know that is by checking out that branch and spinning it up in her laptop and just looking at it, comparing it to the main branch, etc. This is where we hit the limits of the jest snapshots. They're great for diffing HTML, but they don't give you much information about what is the visual outcome, especially when it comes to CSS. This is why visual testing is important. Now, by visual testing, what I mean mostly is generating screenshots automatically. Let's take a look. If you want to take screenshots of your entire app or website, you can already use quite a few tools. For example, Cypress, Puppeteer, or Playwright. They basically control the browser and let you take a screenshot of any page you want. For example, here with Playwright, we can, in just 7 lines of code, spin up Chromium, then tell it to go to localhost 3000, where our app is already running, take a screenshot and save it as PNG before closing Chromium. This takes only a couple of seconds, and because it's running in headless, it doesn't even pop up on your screen or anything. Here's the outcome with the Hungry app. The nice thing about screenshots at the level of your entire app is that they give you a great understanding of the end user experience, and they're also super easy to set up. However, if your screens are quite complex, obviously your screenshots are going to be quite complex as well. Imagine Amazon.com with probably hundreds of components. That gets quite complex, and especially if any of these components changes, of course the screenshot will have to change. The other thing is that if you have any component that depends on external states, for example time or some externally fetched configuration, it also means that some parts of your screenshot may change without the code under the hood actually changing. That makes it really hard to compare between screenshots A in commit A and screenshot B in commit B, because you don't know what changes were caused by changes in the code or not, and there's no way to automate it. So that's what can make this kind of screenshots a bit brittle for use as visual testing. This is why component level testing is quite useful instead. First, let's talk about Storybook. Storybook is a tool that helps you generate a gallery of your components in different states that you can share with designers, product managers, or simply your teammates. Here's an example of configuration of 2 stories, so default and picked here. As you can see, they take different args. Then that generates 2 different variants in the Storybook server that you can spin up either locally or deploy. And by clicking on each of them, I can see my component in different configurations. The nice thing about Storybook is that it has open source plugins like StoryCap. StoryCap generates screenshots from each of your stories. Here's an example. I run yarn StoryCap and pass it the URL of my Storybook. What it does is finds the Storybook, opens Chrome, then figures out what all the stories are and takes screenshots of them. As you can see here, it did take 45 seconds or so to take the screenshots. I'm not entirely sure why, but it is true that Storybook in general is not the fastest tool on the market, simply because it's based on Webpack, which is starting to show its age. An alternative to StoryCap is to use Chromatic. Chromatic is actually the name of the company that is behind Storybook in the first place, so they're well placed to make a good tool for it. What Chromatic does is it deploys your Storybook and then also generates snapshots of each of your stories in the cloud for collaboration. First, here I'm running Chromatic locally. It builds my Storybook, deploys it, it runs some tests as well, and then it triggers the generation of snapshots. As you can see here, it captures some snapshots. And then for each of your pull requests, it gives you a nice interface where you can review it. For example, ask your designer to review the screenshots. So here's a video that I took from their website that kind of highlights the power of it. Now, if you have Storybook already set up, it's probably a great source of screenshots. As long as you don't mind it being a little bit slow, it might be all you need. The only thing is some of these stories might not be best suited for visual testing. Let's say you have a date picker that shows the current date. Well, it's still, because it depends on the external time, it does mean that the screenshots might change depending on when they were taken as opposed to what code changed behind it, which makes it difficult to identify visual changes. That can be an issue. This is kind of why I started investigating other solutions, and that's why I created ViteShot, which is an open source tool that is specifically designed just to take screenshots as fast as possible. Here's an example of a configuration of screenshots with ViteShot. As you can see here, I have a file that ends with .screenshot.tsx. It also works with JSX, of course. That's how ViteShot knows where the screenshots are, and exports two components that don't have any props. Each of them is going to become one screenshot. Here I'm going to run ViteShot, and in a couple of seconds it's going to generate the two screenshots that I want. You can see that it did take 6 seconds, but actually most of that time is spent just spinning up Chrome and just tearing it back down. Here's a more elaborate example on a more complete code base where I run ViteShot, and it's going to generate quite a few screenshots. As you can see, it doesn't even take 1 second per screenshot. ViteShot is built on top of Vite, which is an alternative to Webpack. It's a lot faster and a lot simpler. The reason why Vite is faster than Webpack is simply because Vite means fast in French. But no, really, the main reason is because it's built on top of ESBuild, which is a very, very fast JavaScript bundler. Vite also does really smart things with only loading whatever needs to be loaded thanks to support for ES modules in modern browsers. Because ViteShot is built on top of Vite, pretty much any CSS you throw at it just works. Whether it's emotion, styled components, CSS modules, or even Tailwind, that just works. If you use SVGR, meaning that you want to import SVG files as React components, that will also work out of the box. If you use TypeScript, there is again no configuration required because Vite supports TypeScript out of the box. One thing that's quite useful with ViteShot is that you can add async before screenshot hooks, which let you configure and interact with your component before you actually take the screenshot. Here, I want to take a screenshot of a specific component after tapping into the search bar something to make sure that there are no results, and I want to see specifically the empty state. So what I do here is I just use plain vanilla JavaScript to type into my search bar, and that's the screenshot that we get as a result. The other thing with ViteShot is that you can configure viewports quite easily. Here I set up laptop, tablet, and mobile viewports, and automatically I will get one variant of the screenshot for each viewport that I have configured. It's just 2 extra lines of code in your config. ViteShot also supports a bunch of different frameworks. It's not actually just React. It also supports Preact, Solid, Svelte, and Vue 3. So if one day you feel like shopping around for another framework, ViteShot will still be there for you. Here's an example of how to set up ViteShot in a Create React app. It's literally one command, ViteShot init. First, I run ViteShot init. It will detect what framework I'm currently using in this project and create the config file for me. Then ViteShot will work. The first time it takes a little bit longer because it has to prepare dependencies. And here we have the screenshot ready. That probably looks familiar to you if you use Create React app before. Now we've talked about how to generate screenshots with ViteShot, but what about the next steps? What do you do with these screenshots? The first thing is making sure that your screenshots are consistent. For example, if Alice uses Windows whereas Bob uses macOS, a lot of times they will end up with slightly different renderings of the same component, even if they use the same browser and the same version. Because of that, I would tell you to always generate your screenshots on CI or perhaps in Docker, at least somewhere where you completely control all of the dependencies and versions. If you choose to run ViteShot on GitHub Actions, for example, you can actually use ViteShot-p, which will detect all of the updated screenshots, create a commit for them, and push them on your branch. This means that I can just not worry at all about ViteShot. I can just make the changes to my components locally, push that to GitHub, and then a couple of minutes later, a couple of new commits will appear with the new screenshots on Linux, Windows, or whatever else I have configured GitHub Actions for. Now, here's an example of diffing images on GitHub. This is out of the box on GitHub. You have a few different modes that you can choose from. I find this is one of the most helpful. You can see in this case that Bob actually introduced the bug when he made that small cleanup PR. So one option is to simply keep your screenshots in Git like I've just shown. If you do that, I would highly encourage you to use Git LFS, large file storage, which offloads the actual storing of images somewhere else so that the history of your Git repo won't bloat over time. An alternative would be to use a tool like RegSuite, which lets you, for example, upload your screenshots on S3, and it has plugins for GitHub and GitLab to comment on your pull request to tell you if anything changed in the diffs. So, for example, sometimes it will just tell you, hey, nothing changed, which is exactly what you want when you want to make sure that you haven't broken anything. Or lastly, you can use a tool like Percy, which is a platform that takes the HTML, CSS of your components and actually renders it in their own cloud on Chrome, Firefox, etc. And they will have a really nice interface where you can compare screenshots and review them independently from GitHub, just like you can with Chromatic. Last but not least, ViteShot integrates perfectly with React Preview, which is another tool I created that I mentioned earlier. React Preview is an extension for your IDE. It's currently available for Visual Studio Code and will soon be also for IntelliJ and WebStorm. It allows you to look at a preview of individual React components and see it live update as you type. Here's an example. I have this counter component and I'm opening in React Preview. Then I want to kind of tweak the color, so I want to make the background red and maybe change the color of the text, add a bit of padding, and lastly change the plus and minus color. And I have this screenshot button. The screenshot button generates the screenshot that you need for ViteShot. As you can see, it's exactly what we need, and now we can run ViteShot and it will generate all of the screenshots. And now we have exactly the screenshot we were expecting. Now, just one note is that this specific feature hasn't actually been released yet. It's something that I hacked up in advance for this talk, but it is coming very soon to React Preview. If you want to learn more, check out reactpreview.com. That's about it for ViteShot. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to viteshot.com to check out the documentation. If you have any feedback, it's very early days for ViteShot, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. You had some really good feedback. It's a really nice tool and it looks really, really useful and fast. We do have a couple of questions. We have one from YouTube and I'm gonna, yeah, there we go. So how would it work on the dynamic date component, for example, that you talked about? So if you have dynamic data, there's a typo.
Yeah. So in general, I would say it's a bit of a different case than Storybook, where you just want to show your interactive components. When you want to take screenshots, a lot of times you want to actually show very static components. So I wouldn't show the date picker itself. I would either mock out the dates, where you can pass a prop and you can set it to a specific date that will never change, or actually potentially split up that component into the connected component part that is kind of linked to external state, including time, and the visual components, which is what you actually care about for ViteShot, which is just purely static, and it just takes a bunch of props. It doesn't know anything about what else is happening outside of it.
Okay, yeah. So your idea, like the main way to go around this is just like make components that are purely visual, because that's what you're supposed to be testing right now. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Okay, we have one question from Gleb. Do you want to ask it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. François, this is amazing. I really love it. The question is, you said it's built on top of Vite. It can guess how to handle your CSS modules. It can handle TypeScript. But what if I have a complicated, let's say, config already, like a Webpack config in my project, like most big projects have? Can you hook into that and use that to bundle?
So from my experience, a lot of really complicated Webpack configs, once you switch to Vite, end up being very, very simple configs, just because Webpack kind of requires you to use a lot of different plugins, whereas Vite has a lot of very reasonable defaults that just kind of work for everyone. So to answer your question, no, it does not hook into your bundler or whatever else. It's kind of completely independent. But there is support for aliases, for like SVGR, etc. The one thing that is kind of powerful is that you can pass a custom Vite config. So if it's possible to run your project with Vite, which is kind of the case for the majority of projects, it is possible to run it with ViteShot as well.
Unbelievable. Thank you.
Nice. Okay, we have at least one more question. Julio, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to ask it? He's gone, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, I can ask it.
No, he's here. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm curious about this. Like you mentioned that there is a cost related to running Chrome. So is it possible to run Chrome in the background, like in daemon mode, so that it will just hang around there and you call it give me a screenshot? Probably.
I mean, I don't know if Playwright or Puppeteer offer that. By the way, ViteShot is built on top of Playwright. But what I could quite easily introduce, and now I'm thinking I might implement this over the weekend, is kind of a daemon mode for ViteShot, which is that it kind of starts up in the background and spins up Chrome for you, and then you can just rerun it as much as you want. Or maybe actually a watch mode. Watch mode was on my list. I'm gonna build it.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I was muted, sorry. Okay, cool. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free. Unless it's about asking for a watch mode, it's already on it. And yeah.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say that was awesome.
Thank you. It was really cool. It's a really cool project, and it's really fun. Like, we're just so used to these types of testing being so slow that it's just, we got accustomed to the fact that they take like 10 seconds each screenshot, because each screenshot like has to like, do 10,000 things. So this will, I think, make testing in terms of screenshot testing way faster and way better. People will stop. Oh, are you looking at performance often? Is this a metric that you take into consideration, or is just that Vite is fast?
That is a good question. Really, so there are two reasons why ViteShot is fast. The first one is that it uses Vite, and the team behind Vite puts so much effort into making sure that it's as fast as it can be. And really, like, ViteShot is actually very simple. I think it's less than 500 lines in total, like the entire code base. All it does really is spin up a page and then load each of your components, all of them, and just loop through them. And it loops and just shows one component, takes a screenshot, shows the next component, takes a screenshot. So it doesn't even have to reload the page or anything. And that's why it's fast. That's the other reason why it's fast.
So I'm not specifically looking at performance, but I don't think there are specific reasons why it would go slower over time.
And the last question is there bottlenecks you're aware of, like things that you know can't be faster than they are right now?
Well, obviously, the component has to be ready before you take the screenshot. And by default, ViteShot will just render your component and immediately take a screenshot of that. But you can set up a before screenshot async hook that I mentioned. If your before screenshot hook, for example, relies on waiting for something to load over the network or anything like that that is just slow by nature, then of course taking the screenshot will be slow. So in general, I would just tell you ideally just never use before screenshot because that's as fast as you can make it. But it's there as a utility if you need it.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one more question. So
go.
Yeah, so with this kind of operation, it's something you can run very much in parallel. So have you tried playing around with parallelization so that you will generate a lot at the same time?
That is the other feature that is on the list coming very soon along with Watch. It's actually fairly simple to implement if you think about it. All you need to do is kind of split up all of your screenshot files into buckets of approximately equal size and just run ViteShot in parallel. Even with the same Chrome, just in different tabs. And you can totally
exactly. Yeah. And I guess the next level is that you do service offering, you push it to the cloud and ask some money for it. So
that is on the list as well.
Yeah. Okay. So weekend projects for you. Thanks.
Thank you.
My final question is: are you gonna support Firefox? Since I think Playwright supports Firefox as well.
So one thing I didn't mention is Chrome is just a default configuration, but it's because it's using Playwright. All you need to do is just change it in your config to Firefox. Just check out the docs on viteshot.com. It's explained how to use Firefox. There's also Edge and WebKit as well that is supported.
Okay, cool. Are you thinking about building something where you can take screenshots on all of them and serve those as different screenshots?
Yes.
Also on the list? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yes, thought this
How long is this list?
I don't know, but it sounds quite
long.
big, and it's literally all our questions is like, it's on the list. I have already thought this through. Okay, this was really cool. I will definitely keep an eye out for ViteShot. Thank you so much, François. This was a really cool talk, really amazing project. You are definitely a developer happiness engineer. It makes sense now.